We all are here?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, very good. And just one small thing before we start the class. अगर आप हमें व्हाट्सएप पे मैसेज कर रहे हैं तो अपना नाम लिखना मत भूलिए. Otherwise, how do I know that who you are, or are you the student of BA2 section Z? So this is more your name is more important. Many a times students send me a message but they don't write their name. So I cannot help in that case. Okay, so we will be talking about macroeconomics in this, and I hope you have got your curtailed syllabus also.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Fine. So today we'll try to understand what is macroeconomics or what is macro. And we will try to understand why there is a need for it. So one of the important question is that why there is a need for macro analysis or why we need macro modeling. Now remember one thing, every time we are talking about equations, every time we are talking about one variable depending on the other variable, in some way we are talking about modeling. Okay, we are trying to develop a relationship, or we are trying to establish a relationship between two variables or between certain variables. So this takes us to modeling. Okay, we try to model a particular behavior. As you remember from the very first class, we are talking about economics is the study of economic behavior of human being. So behavior is an abstract notion, right? But we are trying to uh, we are trying to make this behavior objective through this modeling. So modeling is one of the important aspect when we talk about economics. Whether it is micro or whether it is macro, modeling is important. So model means simple, as you say, marginal productivity theory. So the model is based on this theory. Whatever relationship we will talk about, that will be based on a particular model. So now the first question will be, what is macro? So you are having your own definitions, but let me tell you the definition first and then we'll discuss. Macroeconomics is the study of macro behavior. Now what is this macro? Macro means aggregate. Are you writing something? Something has happened? Why you have so many questions? Try to pay attention to what I am writing, okay? Be a bit patient. Macroeconomics is the study of macro behavior. Macro behavior is the aggregate behavior of economic agents in a given economy. So when you will see this behavior, you are observing that we are talking about macro behavior. That means we are talking about the aggregate behavior. We are talking about economic agents, and the behavior is with respect to the economy. So here now for macroeconomics, the subject of study is a particular economy, any economy. It can be Indian economy, it can be US economy, it can be Chinese economy, it can be Afghanistan's economy. So any particular economy or economic system. So in that particular economic system, or with respect to that economic system, we are trying to understand the behavior, the economic behavior of all those who are participating in that economy. So behavior of all those who are participating in that economy, and who are those? They are known as economic agents. So macroeconomics is the study of aggregate behavior of economic agents in a given economy. Okay. Now, let us try to understand the same thing in a bit detail. You know about micro many things. Micro and macro both are coming from these are two Greek letters. Micro means small and macro means large or big. So micro, you remember that it was related to individual units. So you will try to understand from the microeconomics itself that how you differentiate between micro and macro. So if in the microeconomics we were talking about individual units, here in the macro we are talking about aggregate units. Who are these units? Decision makers. These decision makers are known as economic agents. Like in microeconomics, you talk about individual decision maker, but at micro level, at the aggregate level, we call them economic agents. Now, who are the decision makers which you know already? You have talked about consumer, producer, firm, factor. These are the four aspects which we have already studied. We have talked about consumer theory, we have talked about producers theory, we have talked about firm or market, and then we have talked about factor of production. Okay, so factor of production. And here when we were talking about factor of production, we were dealing with individual factor unit, 1 unit of labor, 1 unit of capital, 1 unit of land. Similarly, when we talked about firm, 1 firm, how the firm takes the decision, how the producer takes the decision, or how the consumer takes the decision. Now, when you are talking about macroeconomic agents and their macroeconomic behavior, consumers become households. Okay. Producers can be firms. Now here it is a group. In this case it was a individual unit. This was an individual unit, but in the macro case it is a group of firms. So instead of calling it group, we can call it industry. We can call it corporate sector, now this firms or industry or corporate sector can be both, can be private sector, can be public sector. Group of producers are now classified as industry. So in this industry, all the producers are coming. And in this industry, again, firms are also coming. So this industry can be related to the producers industry, it can be related to the sellers industry. In terms of individual units, you take the producer behavior and the firm's behavior differently. But when we talk about macroeconomy, we take them together because they are actually doing the same thing, supplying the goods and services to the consumer. So that's how there is one group. But here what you do, here you take another group which is government. So now among these producers and firm, you are distributing them as, or you are classifying them as firms and government. And then there is a third situation where you are calling it as foreign sector or external sector. So these are the four economic agents which you are talking about. First one is the household. Household is the group of consumers or aggregate level of consumers, households. When you aggregate the firms, producers, then you have industry, government and foreign sector or external sector together. Okay, now when you are talking about factors of production, here you will be talking about, in case of factors of production, you will be talking about labor market. Now this is the total labor market. You are not talking about individual labor units. You are not talking about one single market, but you are talking about the complete labor market. Or you will be talking about capital market. Okay, so that's how you will try to differentiate. Again, because we are talking about economics, so we are talking about study of economic behavior. But in terms of microeconomics, the study of economic behavior is at the individual level, and in terms of macro, it is at the aggregate level. So economic decision making at the individual level is micro. At the aggregate level, it is macro. Just a very small example, if I take the consumer behavior of any particular person present in the class, that will be micro. But if I take the aggregate behavior of consumption for BA2 section Z, then it will be related to macro. Okay. So individually, if I'm studying your consumer behavior, then it is a subject matter for microeconomics. But if I'm studying the consumer behavior for the whole class, then it is the subject matter for the macroeconomics. Okay. Now let me see if you have any question. Yes, so you have the answer. There was a question and there was an answer, and I agree to it. With Indian adaptation, right? So if you have, not if you have, but you have purchased this book in the last class, so this book continues with you and you don't have to worry too much about purchasing some other book. As of now, you are okay with Paul Samuelson. So continue reading this book. This has most of the course of your macroeconomics given here. Now, whatever we have discussed so far, the aggregate behavior or the macroeconomic behavior, if you have any question, tell me. Anyone, are you able to understand what I am explaining?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, if you do not have any question, let us move further. So the first thing which you will always remember is that in macroeconomics, we are talking about macroeconomic behavior or we are talking about the aggregate behavior, but this behavior is all economic. As we have discussed last time also, we are not talking related to charity, we are not talking related to anything which is based on emotion or anything which is based on personal relationships. We are only talking about economic decision making. So we are talking about economic relationships and we are talking about economic decision.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, the economic decision making at the state level, it will come under the macro or micro?
Okay. So when you say government, now if you are studying this government as a whole, this can be central government, this can be state government, this can be local government. Local government means this rural or local body or urban local body, both your municipalities and Gram Sabha. So local government. So any of the government you are talking about the macro picture.
Thank you.
Okay. But suppose you only want to talk about Gram Sabha in your village. Only Gram Sabha in your village out of the all local governments present in say Uttar Pradesh. So in that case, then your unit of study is one particular Gram Sabha, and that is the study related to microeconomics. So your micro versus macro will depend on selection of study unit. If you are studying something individually, then it is micro. But if you are studying it with the context of the aggregate behavior or aggregate units, then it will be related to macro. So when we talk about macroeconomic behavior macroeconomic behavior of macroeconomic agents. Who are the macroeconomic agents? Now you know. Theoretically, we have 4 macroeconomic agents: households, firms or industry, government, and foreign sector. Now, what is this macroeconomic behavior? How do you understand this macroeconomic behavior, or how do we explain this macroeconomic behavior? So macroeconomic behavior is explained through macroeconomic variables. Okay. Now what are these macroeconomic variables? Consumption. You know most of the things. Okay, I'm not telling you anything new. Consumption, savings, investment. The only thing which you have to be careful about that how you are picking up the variables or how you are identifying the behavior. When you were talking about microeconomic behavior or micro level decision making, you were talking about say consumption of a consumer. Now here you are talking about total consumption of the household. Okay, it is not one consumer, but it is the consumption expenditure by the household, total savings by the households. Now all the households put together, like in our country, there are more than 6 lakh households. When talking about macroeconomics, we are talking about all the households together in the country. We are not talking about my home or your home. Each house is one household. Okay. But when we are talking about macroeconomics, we are talking about all the households together in the economy. So their behavior is related to consumption, it can be related to savings, it can be related to investment, it can be related to output, it can be related to income, it can be related to employment, it can be related to inflation, and the list goes on. Inflation, then interest rate, exports, imports, government expenditure, taxes, deficit, debt. Okay, so these are few of the most important economic variables which we will be talking in your macroeconomics. Okay, we'll understand gradually what do we mean by all of these individually, but these are the macroeconomic variables. So macroeconomic behavior is explained through macroeconomic variables. And as we were talking about that this behavior, the study of this macroeconomic behavior is actually economic modeling. When you say modeling means you are trying to model the behavior. You are trying to put a structure for this behavior. And this behavior is based on the macroeconomic variables. So modeling is related to these macroeconomic variables. So what is modeling? Relationship is behavior between macro variables. Okay. Now one of the important variable which I just left is population. This is very important for us because now we are talking about the aggregate picture. We are talking about summation of everything. So in that case, we are talking about population. Me to explain or anything which you want to ask or say?
मैम इकोनॉमिक मॉडलिंग मैम फिर से एक्सप्लेन कर दीजिए.
See, what you are saying is that in your macroeconomics, you are studying the economic behavior of macroeconomic agents at the aggregate level. So, macroeconomic behavior. Macroeconomic behavior means, say, for example, we take say consumption, because you know it. Now this consumption is not for one consumer, but it is for the household. So of macroeconomic agent. Now this can be related to households. This can be related to government. This can be related to foreigners. Anything we can study. So macroeconomic behavior of macroeconomic agents has a relationship okay, or there is a particular way in which these two variables will interact with each other. So that is relationship. How this consumption of households or how the consumption of government takes place, or what are the factors which will affect the consumption. So there is a relationship. And this relationship is explained through modeling. So what are you trying to do actually in this modeling? Explaining the factors determining any macro relationship. Now, again, because we took the example of consumption. So say consumption for households or maybe government or foreigner. So this is consumption. C is a consumption. Is a function of say income level. So now this consumption is the total consumption. Total consumption for the economy. Not for me or you individually, but it is the total consumption for the economy or for the group of some aggregate agent. So you add up all the individual consumers, you will get households. You add up all the individual producers, you will get firm or industry. Now, these producers can be related to agricultural producers. This can be producers in the industry sector. This can be or in the manufacturing sector. These producers can be in terms of producing software services. So producers can be any producers, but producing at the aggregate level. So now this C, the total consumption, becomes a function of, say, income, or it can be dependent on interest rate, or it can be dependent on wealth, or it can be dependent on price. So suppose I talk about this, where consumption is a function of income level, interest rate, wealth, and prices. Now remember this. Now W is not the wages, P is not profit, but it is prices. Okay. So that's how you model this relationship. C is dependent on Y, R, W, and P. So C is a dependent variable. Y, R, W, P are the independent variable because they will decide the level of this. Independent variables will decide the level of dependent variable. So if you are trying to develop the relationship, you are trying to understand that how it behaves or how economic agents behave. So how economic agents are behaving here? Their consumption of households, government and foreign sector depends on their income level, the interest rate in the economy, wealth stock in the economy, or the prices in the economy. So just go back a bit and try to see that you talked about demand. No, you talked like this. QD was a function of, not this way, QX. Px was a function of Px. Then you say Y of A. Then you say P of Y. And like that you were saying. So this was a micro model. Model is just a relationship, okay? But now what you are saying? C is a function of Y, P, all the price. It includes the price of X and Y both, and at the economy level, not in Allahabad, not in Mumbai separately, but you are taking all the prices together. Interest rate, or like that. Okay, I hope it is clear now.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other question? Rishabh, have you raised your hand?
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, when we talk about a particular industry, like a textile industry, will it come in the micro or macro?
Macro, why? Because see, you are using the term industry. You are not using the term producer. So if you use the term, that's why I said that the decision of micro or macro depends on the choice of the subject unit which you are studying. So if you are talking about a producer, or if you are talking in terms of producers, again it is micro. But you are talking about industry. So definitely it is macro. Okay.
Okay, ma'am.
Now,
Okay, ma'am.
as someone is writing, you take the students of section Z or you take the students of whole Allahabad University. Both are macro because your subject unit is not single decision maker. If you are talking about micro, the decision maker is single unit, individual unit. But once you club the decision of two individual units together or many individual units together, so if you are studying the joint decision making of units, then you are talking about macro. So in simple words, you call it joint, but actually it is not joint, it is aggregate. Or it is related to summation. You sum up everything. Now you remember in the microeconomics market theory, what we said, industry equilibrium is given. Why we took industry equilibrium as given? We always talked about how the equilibrium of a firm is decided given the industry equilibrium. So price is decided by the industry. Firm is a price taker. Or even if the firm is a price maker, we are not talking about industry because industry is not one individual. Industry is always a group of people, a group of decision makers. This industry can be anything. It can be related to film industry, it can be related to media industry, it can be related to transportation industry, it can be related to shipping industry, it can be related to steel industry, any culture, food products, anything. It can be anything, but this is the summation of decision makers. That's why you are talking about micro and macro separately. So whatever you are writing, don't see it like this. Microeconomics is not the subset of macroeconomics. Macroeconomics is not the macroeconomics is not the summation of microeconomics. Don't understand it like that. Okay, you are not actually getting the right idea, or don't try to just fantasize the things. Try to understand it from the theory perspective. If you are studying the aggregate behavior, it is macroeconomics. If you are studying the individual behavior, it is microeconomics. So microeconomics is very separate from macroeconomics. So no question of being subset. And similarly, it is not summation. माइक्रोइकोनॉमिक्स का समेशन नहीं है मैक्रोइकोनॉमिक्स. You will understand gradually that when you are talking about macroeconomic behavior, your assumptions will change. So you will never say that microeconomics is a subset of macroeconomics. Microeconomic decision making is different. Macroeconomic decision making is different. Okay, what else you are writing? A Gram Sabha consists of 7 to 31 individuals, so can it come under microeconomics? In case of monopoly, a single firm represents the industry, so can we consider it in a macro level? No, you are not. Why you are not? We'll take 2 classes in understanding one thing. How you differentiate between micro and macro, we'll understand when we are talking about circular flow of income. You will understand that why you are not calling microeconomics as a subset of macroeconomics. The subset is a very wrong idea, okay? And understand that when decision making is independent, it is micro. But when decision making is conditional upon others' behavior, it is macro. This is very important, okay, for you to remember. Don't get confused easily. Independent, when you are taking the decision making independent, when you making the decision independent, anyone making the decision independent, it will be micro irrespective of your Gram Sabha or government or consumer or whosoever, foreigner, any international agency. But when a decision making is conditional upon others' behavior or other factors, then it will always be related to pro. Suppose you are talking about your consumption level. Now, if the consumption level of one individual is a function of income level of its own, आपका कंजम्पशन सिर्फ आपकी इनकम पे डिपेंड करता है, देन इट इज माइक्रो. बट अगर आपका कंजम्पशन आपकी फैमिली की इनकम, आपकी फैमिली की वेल्थ, आपकी सोसाइटी का इनकम लेवल एंड लाइक दैट many of the factors can be considered, then it is no longer micro. Okay, so
Excuse me, ma'am.
now yes, tell me what happened.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, if we are analyzing the world economy, in which we start with some separate economy like Indian economy, then American economy, then even then we would say that Indian economy comes under macro economy.
See, the moment you are talking about economy, it is always macro. Why it's macro? Because what is economy? Economy is the summation of decision making units. So economy can be never micro, okay? It is always macro. Because you are including all the decision makings. Now levels can be different. Domestic economy, international economy, regional economy. Okay, so you have different types of classification to define this economy. You can talk about Indian economy, or you talk about any economy in domestic, with a domestic perspective. So you are talking about Indian economy individually, again in the macro sense only. So it can be domestic. You can study the Indian economy with respect to the international situation, right? You can study any of the economy, or you can study the relationship between any two economies, Indian economy and US economy, Indian economy, Chinese economy. That is all macro. You can talk about regions. Like how do you talk about regions? You talk about North America, Asia. You can talk about Commonwealth nations. You can talk about South Asia. Or like that. Okay? You have different classifications. So all is your macro. Pay attention to this thing. We are talking about summation of decision making. So when you are summing up all the decision makers together, then you are talking about a macro picture. Okay, you are talking about the total income or the total output or like that. So there are some common terms which you already know, but we want to now know it theoretically. GDP, then what else do you know? Inflation, you know about trade, that is international trade. You know about foreign exchange.
एक्सक्यूज मी मैम
Yes.
मैम ये पॉइंट क्लियर नहीं हुआ कि जैसे अगर हम पूरे वर्ल्ड की इकोनॉमीज की बात करें तो इंडियन इकोनॉमी एक यूनिट तो बन जाएगी माइक्रो
नहीं, ऐसा नहीं है. Because see, what I was telling you is that when the decision making is dependent on, is not independent but is conditional upon others' decision, then it is always a macro picture. Now, again, at the macro level, you can have different classifications. Like even in the micro level, okay, let me explain like this. Suppose you are talking about micro decision making. And our subject of study is a farmer. So farmer in say UP, MP, a farmer, okay, Maharashtra or Kerala or USA. So this all is micro. So you are talking about the farmer's decision making, whether it is in case of Uttar Pradesh. Now in Uttar Pradesh you select one village or wherever you take. You take only your family farming. That is micro for us. Okay. Even if you talk about a farmer in a USA, again it is micro. Why? Because it is the individual decision making. But when you are talking about, okay, let me continue here. Now I am talking about total agricultural output. Okay. So now this is India. It can be Maharashtra. It can be China. It can be South Asia. Or it can be world. So if I'm talking about a particular farmer, then this is micro. But if I'm talking about the main activity of the farmer, that is say producing agricultural output, so then it is related to the macro situation which I am talking about. So a farmer using fertilizer is a micro decision making. Total fertilizer used at the economy level or at the state level, country level, that is a macro decision making. Now you should try to understand that we are saying that micro decisions are independent or are dependent on limited number of factors. But in case of macro decisions, the decisions are conditional upon several factors. Now, total agricultural output can depend on total availability of land, total population, labor size, use of capital, demand in the market, government policy, international demand. There can be several factors which will affect the total output. Yes, so now we are done with the class. Okay, see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.